EU acquis. Second and third energy package, for example, about which we so much talk in European Union, are a result of a long process in European Union, which is full of mistakes. But the failure is so much more interesting than success, since you learn from it, and Ukraine can, of course, learn from it as well without repeating the same mistakes. EU currently benefits a lot from creating a competitive, secure, and sustainable energy market. And I believe it will be soon in Ukraine the same as well. Ukraine, as a member of energy community, was not very successful in transposing second energy package, but then Maidan came and a crisis, and as usually people say, never waste a good crisis to go, or never let a good crisis go to waste. But everybody wanted to help to Ukraine. And we in the Energy Community Secretariat helped in the way that we drafted a gas market law, electricity market law, energy regulator law, and we just sent them to Kiev. And then many months, nothing happened. But then new Ukrainian government this year suddenly saw an opportunity for urgently needed reforms, and they started to, or we together finalized, fine-tuned the gas market law, which was approved just 2 weeks ago, and it is compliant with the third package. And it was an obligation of Ukraine only from 1st of January this year on. I can say that among all energy community contracting parties, Ukraine is now almost most developed or most advanced in transposing the third energy package, at least in gas sector. And all the law has to be fully implemented till 1st of October this year, and secondary legislation is already being drafted. So you could not imagine something like this even half a year ago. Ukraine is now entering pilot project on early implementation of capacity allocation mechanism network code on Polish border. So it's much more advanced in early transposition of network codes than many EU member states. Ukrtransgaz recently entered ENTSO-G as observer. And I can really say that this gas sector reform is a success story. Of course, it was under strong influence, awareness of international community, also IMF and World Bank were very active in it, and of course European Union. But this we did all together well. Next step is energy regulator law, which is just being discussed in the government, and I think it will be sent to the parliament next week. I think it was already approved. But then, next to these success stories, there are also some less successful stories. Electricity sector is, for example, a story which could become a success, but a draft electricity market law compliant with the third package is drafted, and I hope we will finalize it in next days with the ministry. But on one side, in gas sector, there was a strong player, Naftogaz, which is state ownership, in state ownership, and with its very knowledgeable and reform-oriented management, it was also a main reform driver in the country. In electricity sector, we don't have such a reform driver, and recently leaked document on PR strategy of one of the major energy private companies in Ukraine. You will all understand that I talk about Fortress. I mean, it's Krepost. Shows that there will be a strong opposition to reform electricity sector. Even bigger or a little bit more sad story is energy efficiency, where Ukraine, as member of energy community, should already long ago transpose energy performance of buildings directive, energy services directive, and energy labeling directive. Only the energy labeling directive was transposed. The other two are in draft laws for 2 years already, I mean, pending all the time. Things in Ukraine are complicated, but perhaps today's panel will reveal some of the curtains covering this mystery of the reform process inside the government and inside the parliament, which is for views or through the eyes of let's say, Westerners, sometimes not properly understood. And this is the way how I will introduce the first speaker today. It will be Minister Demchyshin, who is also the main target for cannon shooting from the fortress.
That's not that bad.
Yeah, you became suddenly kind of a hero. What doesn't kill makes you stronger. Just keep this in mind.
That's for sure.
So please, Minister Demchyshin.
I will then stay seated. I think that's the format, right? Ladies and gentlemen, very happy to see you all here. I see that our panel attracts a lot of attention, so that we didn't even expect so many. So some of you have to stand in the back. Sorry about this. I'm very glad to see many people that we work on various occasions. So many of you know what we do, how we progress, and what the plans are. But I still will shortly focus on some of these issues. Also regarding the few, I would still like to comment 2 points that Mr. Kopacz raised. We work with him very tightly, and gas market law and electricity market law, these two are very comparable for us. We just started gas market 2 months earlier. But with electricity market law, we are very advanced. So I think in the next few weeks, we will be ready for filing to Parliament for approval. So progress is made. Well, I don't think there will be opposition. I think we'll find solution, and we will progress on that. On energy efficiency, I also think that Mr. Savchuk will tell today some of his successes, about few of his successes, and money which is flowing from World Bank and EBRD into the segment. We see district heat companies receiving funding. We see IFC providing money, and other institutions providing money to Ukrainian institutions that distribute this money among the population, which is the key target of energy efficiencies. You see, gas has been consumed by industry for longer time, which was priced also at the market. So, which needed to be done is most probably already done in the sector of private consumption. There is huge room. So there are specific problems related to ownership rights, but I think that we jointly are focusing on this now, and during this year we will fix some of the problems, and new heating season will be easier than the previous one. So, but I would like to focus on a few slides I put together. Can you see Ukraine? If you look at its reserves, regardless of reserves of energy resources, regardless coal, oil, gas, uranium, all key resources that are required for electricity production or heat production, heat energy production, they are available in Ukraine. It is a strange situation, but the volume that the volume of those resources that are being produced now is very marginal compared to potential. So You know, just focusing on production now, which will help to produce working places, to generate taxes, to change infrastructure, will be very beneficial to our budget, because then currency risk will not be that important. So lowering imports, which we have now, we can balance our trade balance and resolve many other problems. So you see, resources are here. Sometimes we may lack technology to extract those resources. Sometimes we need to introduce more competition into the segments. But that's what we are currently doing. Apart from these resources that you see and we have some other very valuable things like infrastructure. You know, in order to extract coal, you certainly need rail, and rail is available everywhere. You know, Ukraine has been transition or transmission country or area from Soviet times. You know, resources from Siberia were transported into Europe, and Baltic Sea and Black Sea were connected also by Ukrainian roads, electricity, electricity lines, power lines, gas pipelines. So, and all those are here since Soviet time, sometimes outdated, sometimes requiring modernization, but they are here. So it is easier to modernize, and it is being done now. Again, with support of World Bank, EBRD, with other IFIs. But something that we need now is the next wave. IFIs know us very good. What we need now is private sector. We need many smaller players that are more entrepreneurial, that are more risk takers, to come into country and you know, develop reserves, modernize infrastructure, and you know, make money also for themselves. So privatization may be one of the steps that will help in this direction. Just few words about challenges. Yeah, I mean, we have the war in the East. Many times you have heard about that, but I will tell you a few figures. Over last 7-8 months, we provided electricity and gas into the area. The total value, which was not paid. So the total value of it is more than $1 billion. That's what Ukraine invested in this war. Apart from people that have died, apart from infrastructure that got destroyed, apart from GDP, 20% of GDP that was lost in this process. But that direct money that has not been recovered by energy sector, by sector that I'm responsible for. Anthracite, strangely, but all mines that we operated before, which could have produced anthracite coal, are in the area. We don't have single mine that is on Ukrainian territory now, or on controlled territory, which is producing anthracite. And half of our thermal power plants require anthracite. So huge problem. On one side, we have capacity to generate. On the other side, we don't have coal to burn. And we need to buy it from South Africa for expensive, for very much money. We need to solve the complicated logistical problems, you know, to get it here. But that's the situation that is caused by the same war. Dependence on Russia. You see, it is we are dependent, unfortunately, and not only in gas sector. In gas sector, we with the help of Naftogaz, the dependence was reduced dramatically. You know, before we were getting 95 or you know, almost 100% of gas imported from Russia. Now, this is less than 40%, which is good, which allows us to stand up and have a economic conversation with Gazprom, which is very good. In nuclear fuel, it is not the case. Now we are working hard to diversify, but it is still a problem. In coal segment, as I said, now we are focusing massively on own production. We have opportunities to get self-sufficient very quickly. In oil and gas, well, 70% of oil products distributed in Ukraine come also from outside. This is, again, currency and other economic disadvantages, but I think that this is next sector which we should focus for sure, so that we develop own production. Very recently, gas production became very popular, and I'm sure that some of you here in this room, you represent private gas producers. Certainly, there were a few steps, political steps that that government should have taken, which is subsoil tax and a limitation on disposal of gas over the heating season. But those were, steps that we needed to take in the period of war, in a period when we were not sure whether we can go through the winter. These were short-term steps, and I would like to assure you that we are reverting to commercial relationships, and we understand what needs to be done. And jointly with Ministry of Finance and with participants from the industry, we are suggesting to change tax law and budget, so that subsoil tax or rent payment tax will be changed. Rent payments will be changed, which should help producers to get sufficient funding into new production, attract new investments. Well, cross subsidies, also big topic. In electricity and oil and gas, we have population tariffs that are below economically viable level, and they are both these segments are subsidized. In case of electricity market, industry is subsidizing, industry is paying the subsidy. In case of gas, budget is paying the difference. In electricity, the figure of subsidy is like 52 billion hryvnia, which even today is more than $2.5 billion. In gas segment, total value of cross subsidy paid by the budget is even higher. I mean, it has been close to 5 billion. Now, with the change in tariff, it should be less. But let's see how the things develop. One more challenge, management. See, over 20 years, many state companies were run as they were run. So a lot of effort is currently made to change management, to improve management. Some of the companies are well managed. For example, again, referring to Naftogaz, I mean, these guys were doing very well in bargaining with Gazprom, and they were successful in getting good results for Ukraine. But some of the companies need improvement, and this is big topic on my agenda. Next slide. Opportunities, diversification for sure, demonopolization, privatization, which are self-explanatory. I won't focus on that. Closeness of EU market is very important, because we are close to very big off-take market. We can sell, I mean, if we increase production, we we can sell anything. We have, like I said, reserves, we have generation capacities, we have transportation infrastructure. So we should be getting benefits out of it. We are, but the potential is great. You know, in case of electricity market, we are focusing on synchronization with NSOE. So this law that we are working now is very important for us. If we want to synchronize our energy system with European by 2018, we need to make regulatory changes as well. So, next. Certainly, the key directions to go are efficient use. You know, elimination of cross subsidies is significantly helping in this direction. Metering. Many off-takers don't, just because historically it was not important, just because in Soviet Union energy was cheap, so no one needed meters. Now everybody needs to know what he is paying for. So this is a key focus of the ministry and of the regulator. And I think you know, we are moving this milestone as soon as possible forward. This is the key priority. You know, on one side, increasing tariffs, well, we definitely need to support consumers. And like I said, many banks are at our side. Many financial institutions are helping us a lot. Domestic production, well, if reserves are there, if infrastructure is here, we just need to make transparent privatization or disposal of licenses and let people in and you know, attract not just money for development, but also technology, also management, also competition, we can prepare a competitive environment. And the most important, I think, outsourcing. You see, Ukrainian state-owned companies, they do everything in-house. They're not used to outsource, which is on one side not that risky, but on the other side is preventing competition, is pretty much closing the entire industry to develop. And I think it needs to be done. Diversification of supplies, I talked already on that. Reforms, gas market, electricity market reforms, as mentioned. Regulator law, already mentioned by Mr. Kopach. Market-based pricing, very important, because how should we talk about energy efficiency if population is paying only 20% of the market price? Very difficult. Corporate governance and elimination of cross subsidies, also already discussed today. So that's directions. Next slide. Directions to invest. I think I tried to attract attention to key points, but certainly first we need to restore Donbass. A lot of infrastructure has been destroyed. I think it will be very difficult geopolitical issue, but that's something that needs to be done, because this is part of the entire Ukrainian system. So we rely on it. Transportation, as I mentioned, gas and electricity, currently being very important for the transit from Russia to European Union, and the European Union is stable market, large market, and increasing consumption. Over the next 10 years, gas consumption will increase at least by 10%. Slowly, but in volume terms, it will increase. So the only large supplier that can sustain this growth or can catch up with this growth is Russia, and we being at the being intermediary between supplier and off-taker, we can facilitate this transit. On GTS, I'm sure Andrei will provide a few comments, and on general privatization, at this point of time, we are preparing information memorandums on coal industry. So several tens of coal mines will be put up on sale very shortly, within next one or 1.5 months. So any companies interested in this segment are welcome. Energy generation, we do still have very large and important thermal power generation facility called Centrenergo with 7 gigawatt of installed capacity. So very interesting asset, and I've heard already a lot of interest to this company. Oblenergo, there are at least 3 state-owned Oblenergos that are controlled by the state. So those will be also put up for sale. Oblenergo is a local electricity distribution companies in Kharkiv, in Zaporizhia, in Khmelnytsk, all those 3, and there are many more which will be, offering smaller stakes, less than controlling stakes. Oil and gas licenses. This is a new idea, and I am sure it is one of the interests of some of you. I'm sure that we will change all necessary regulatory requirements, and this will be, licenses will be put up for sale, and new entrants will be able to acquire clean title for reserves and develop those without risking, deprivatization processes or anything like that. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. This was a little bit longer than envisaged 10 minutes, but I didn't dare to intervene because Minister is Minister, and I will not intervene with next speaker because Mr. Šefčovič is my boss, but I will intervene later on. But now I would really ask you if you have, let's say there will be, we have to risk some time for questions, but we will limit it on, let's say, 2, 3, 4 minutes, perhaps 2 questions for Minister. I'd be very happy if I don't see any hand being raised. There is one, please. If you can present yourself.
Sure. Andrei Zinchenko, Reanimation Package of Reforms. There is this thing that where you put your money, that's where your priorities are. So I wonder why the amount of money invested in subsidies is like 24 billions, and in energy efficiency, which can be the main driver for economic development next 5 years, is like 300 millions of hryvnias. The latter one being the funds of EU. The money into subsidies are the funds from state budget. So when we will increase the funding for energy efficiency to make it like really serious, because for such countries as ours, it's small.
Look, I think you answered the question. Subsidies come from the budget, and social security is highly important for the state. Increasing tariff, you make sure that you will not endanger those that cannot afford. This is critical. Energy efficiency is highly critical, but for businesses and for each particular family. And we don't see the figures, but the figures are massive. If you talk to IFIs, you will hear that, for example, district heat, 380 million. 10 district heat companies received $380 million. 10 water supply companies received again more than $300 million. And this money is flowing into the industry. You are talking about private individuals that are receiving money from the state, but you see, this program just started and it will increase. There are many programs currently being developed. So I think energy efficiency will be top topic for next 5 to 10 years.
Thanks, Minister. Any further question? No? Then I will introduce... Sorry. One more. But then, can I ask you kindly if you could perhaps save your questions for the end? Because first it was envisaged that there will be this immediate reaction, but I think we will lose too much time with it. Can I? Yeah, okay, gentleman agreed. So, next speaker, please, Vice President of European Commission, Mr. Maroš Šefčovič.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kopač, dear Janez, and I'm very glad that I'm in such a distinguished panel with two very close colleagues, and I would say already the friends of mine, Andriy and Vladimir, because we are spending a lot of time on the phone calls, we are spending a lot of time in the meetings, and you see now we are together in the panel. And I will try to do my best to be within the time frame, because I see that there is a lot of interest for not only listening to us but also for discussing this very important topic with the panelists. So I think when Ukraine decided to join the energy community in 2010. We saw it in the Europe as a clear sign of its intention to become part of the European energy market, to build competitive market with strong interconnections with all the neighbors. It was at the same time a commitment to undertake fundamental reforms in the energy sector, overhauling the old Soviet model of energy markets in the Ukraine. But we all know that it didn't start very well, because I think if you look what happened since 2010, I think if you really want to be honest with each other, we have to say that until the last year, not much happened in this direction. And I would even say, on the contrary, that intransparency increased, and business empires closely linked to the country's leadership made colossal gains, which was one of the main reasons why the people took to the streets, to the Maidan in November of 2013. And I think that the consequences of these developments are well known, especially to all the Ukrainians. That there is rent-seeking, super profits, increasingly expensive subsidies, and an acute lack of investments, threatening not only energy supply but also the entire Ukrainian economy. I would say that we have seen that a lot of things really changed after Maidan events. The political conditions, we can say, are now in place to seriously tackle energy sector reforms. And Minister Demchyshin was just outlining the plans, the experience, and of course the future challenges which clearly lie ahead of the Ukrainian government. So there are a lot of challenges, but I think that the reforms are going in the right direction. So let's just quickly go through the achievements and to describe them in very practical terms, to show how quickly in some areas Ukraine managed to get closely integrated into the European energy sector. If you remember, in 2013, Ukraine received less than 10% of its imported gas from the EU. In 2014, it was already 26%. And in 2015, it could be far more, even up to half of Ukrainian gas imports. Today, we visited Naftogaz, we visited also Ukretransgaz, and I think that figures and the predictions are clearly pointed into that direction. And I think that if we look at it also from the financial point of view, we can say that this already saved Ukraine a great amount of money, and it also increased its energy security significantly. And I would underline also during the last critical winter period, which I think was very, very crucial for this spring, and I think it has proven that if we cooperate very well together, we can achieve a lot of very important achievements. What was also, I think, very significant was that Ukraine managed to establish very strong relationship with Slovakia, Poland, Hungary, and other EU countries, and the European Commission managed to facilitate the reverse flows, which I think been on critical importance for the last winter, and I think it was also excellent example of what our partnership can achieve. Minister Demchyshin was referring to the new gas law, which was adopted by the Rada on the 9th of April, and I really believe that this legislation will really bring the full compliance with the EU energy market. Now the government has 6 months to fully implement the decision by adopting the relevant secondary legislation. And you know, I was working before in national capacity, now I work for the European Commission, and I know that secondary legislation is something which is very challenging, where we really need to be very focused on the detail to get this right. But if this happens, and I believe it will, this will open new ways for cooperation and new avenues for investment. The last week I had a meeting with the major European gas companies, and I was explaining them about the new gas law, about the new framework which is being established in the Ukraine, and how this would really improve the position of the Ukraine to be very attractive for the foreign investors. Of course, the expectations from their side is regulatory stability, transparent legislation, and full implementation of the gas law. And then, of course, we can also have a specific look how we can use fully the Ukrainian gas storage, how we can improve the efficiency and even better and more intense use of transport system, because this could have a very important role for the overall energy security of the wider Central and Eastern European region. Energy efficiency, it was already mentioned in the question from the gentleman, but also by the ministers, but also renewables, for which the Ukraine has also big potential, and I'm very glad that here also our cooperation is starting to bear fruit. I was very much encouraged by the activities of the Ukrainian mayors, by the interest in working together in the framework of the Covenant of Mayors, which is such an EU network where we share the best practices, where we learn from each other, and where we are, through this positive example, helping those who want to participate, those cities, to work on the energy efficiency plans, which would increase the energy efficiency of their cities by 20%. Currently, 73 municipalities in Ukraine are already part of this exercise. 10% of population lives in the cities, and we know that additional municipalities with additional 9% of the population are interested in this cooperation, and we will do our utmost to facilitate this process. And I also know that we have already 11 cities as a front runners, which have been selected as a cities for priority investment projects, which will be supported by the EBRD. Much more is in the pipeline, and I think we will discuss it later here in the energy panel. I'm very glad that Mr. Savchuk is sitting next to the Danish foreign minister who came here, I think, with great idea to open and establish energy efficiency center. And I can tell you that Denmark is the best if it comes to energy efficiency. We are learning a lot in the European Union from Denmark companies, from Danish technologies for their schemes to support energy efficiency. And I'm very glad that Denmark is ready to share the experience with Ukraine, because I am sure that they will offer you the best what we have in Europe. Very often I'm getting the question, how can Ukraine play even more active role in the European energy market, and how Ukraine can be the close partner to the energy union. You know, and I said it many times, that for the European Commission, energy union doesn't stop at the EU borders. We clearly see that we have partnership countries outside of the European Union in energy community, and we want to work with them as closely as they would like to work with us. And I know that Ukraine is very much interested in very close collaboration. And we are working on this within the Commission, within the project team, where 14 commissioners are working on the Energy Union project. We are coordinating our external part of the Energy Union policies together with High Representative Federica Mogherini. And if you would listen to her, she would repeat the same thing, that Ukraine is one of the cornerstones of our policies, and that we would like to upgrade our relationship to the strategic energy partnership between EU and Ukraine. So what are the, I would say, critical elements the Ukraine can really bring into this relationship? What are the crucial policies where we would like to work with Ukraine even closer than until now? Of course, the first, I think we need to work together how to establish an open and competitive Ukrainian market. Then we have to work together on increasing of the capacity and the number of interconnections. And then, of course, what I think will be very important for Ukraine would be to expand international partnership. And I think that all this would be possible, but there is this one precondition, and it was the first policy area I was referring to create a competitive energy market in Ukraine. Because otherwise the cost of energy system would be simply too high for the economy, the service quality would be low, and then it would be very difficult to attract the foreign investments for the modernization of energy sectors. Minister was already highlighting several pieces of the legislation which is seen by Ukrainian government, but also by the European Commission as fundamental. And I really would like to thank Janez Kovács for his personal involvement and involvement of his team into the close collaboration on these very important pieces of legislation. So just to mention some of them. I think what we need, and I know that work is progressing quite well on this issue, is truly independent energy regulator. We need an electricity market with separation and equal and fair access to transmission infrastructure, and of course we need the reform of Naftogaz, and I'm sure that Andrei Kovalev in a second would speak about this issue. Because maybe something less obvious to the energy market player, but I would say of equal importance are also the clear rules for billing, for metering, for measuring of the energy consumption, and I was very glad that Minister had it in his presentation. Interconnectors. I think it's quite clear that if we want to have in Europe internal energy market, we need to work not only on the law and administrative procedures harmonization, but we need to build also physical possibility to trade the energy. We need this energy hardware. We need interconnectors. We need high voltage connections. And I think that's the same applies also to Ukraine. The good thing is that the existing gas interconnectors have already been upgraded and allow for the increased EU gas supplies to Ukraine, which I have already mentioned. But I'm sure that more can and will be done in the future. There was already a reference made to the upgrade of Ukrainian gas transmission system, which is also being done with the help of EBRD and EIB financing in the sum of 300 millions. On top of it, I know that the work is already quite advancing and the planning is going ahead with new gas interconnectors to bring liquefied gas from Poland to Ukraine, which would further increase the Ukraine energy security. I think that we already know how difficult it is where you are too dependent on one dominant supplier, and therefore we are working very closely with the southeastern European countries in the so-called KESEC format, which is abbreviation for better connectivity in Central and Southeastern Europe. And I'm very glad that that Ukraine is participating in this group as well. And one of the options where we are waiting there is how can we use better the huge Ukrainian potential, which is its vast gas storage possibilities for European market and also for increased energy security in this region. So this leads me to the third element I mentioned, this international cooperation and partnership. So what Ukraine can profit from and what Ukraine has to offer. I think that this huge gas storage I already made a reference to. Then, of course, it's important place on the energy map of Europe and the very important transit system. So the role of a transit country will be very crucial for the future of Ukraine and European energy security. And then that huge potential for energy security. Of course, precondition to this would be that the Ukraine would continue on its path on energy sector reform. Transparency has to be improved. The necessary legal changes have to be adopted and implemented. And I think listening to the ministry, it's quite clear that the lessons from the past have been learned, because insider privatization and double pricing regime should definitely become the relics of the past. Because only with this stable business environment, Ukraine will become attractive for international investors. Partnership and investments in the gas sector will be greatly facilitated by the Naftogaz reform. So therefore, I'm very much looking forward to the presentation of Mr. Kobolev. I'm sure that this reform will be pursued in the full compliance with the EU energy market rules, including the unbundling of transmission assets. And while we have started with the gas sector, the European Commission is very much willing to support such an international partnership also in other sectors. We've been discussing generation sector. We are talking about Ukrainian power plants, which are old and where, of course, the efficiency is not on a high level. And since these big changes, only one thermal power plant has been built, and therefore I see that there is a lot of possibilities on improvement in that field as well. If you allow me to conclude on energy efficiency, because here I think we have to underline the huge potential Ukraine has. If Ukraine were to increase energy efficiency to the EU average level, annual energy savings would be up to 34 billion cubic meters of natural gas. This is more than the entire consumption of Spain, and it's equal to the projected levels of imports of gas for Ukraine. So therefore, if Ukraine would do that well with energy efficiency, it's almost immediately becomes not gas importer, but gas exporter. And I know that it takes time to become the fan of energy efficiency. I am from Slovakia. And I know that also in the new member states of the European Union, it takes some time to see these small gains, these gradual changes, gradual increase in energy efficiency. But I can tell you it works. I mean, in EU, if we increase the energy efficiency just by 1%, we can import by 2.6% less of gas. So imagine if we can do it and increase the efficiency by 5, 10 or more percent. It really makes a difference. And in Ukraine, there is a huge potential. The biggest one in the areas Minister was referring to, buildings, district heating sectors, and of course for that what it's needed, it's clear legislation. These are financial incentives, proper funding, and here we are ready to cooperate closely with Ukrainian authorities. So I just would like to summarize that we just highlighted with the Minister the challenges, the potential, but also the synergies for both Ukraine and the European Union. We have seen many of them in the analysis of the recent gas stress tests we made in the EU. So I think that the future is in the close cooperation, in the collaboration, and I really would like to appreciate the good working relationship with Minister Demchyshin, with CEO of Naftogaz, Mr. Kobolev, and I'm very much looking forward to our future cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice President. As announced, we will change the scenario and questions are following later. So our next speaker is coming from United States, Mr. William Bryan, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure, Security and Energy Restoration, was active in preparation of last year's very known contingency plan done together with Canadians. But now there is going on a process on which is searching or looking for long-term resilience, not only contingency, but resilience of Ukrainian energy sector. And we are, of course, eager to hear the news. Thanks.
Mr. Kopacz, I will hire you if it buys me a couple extra minutes, just so you know. It is certainly an honor to be here on behalf of the Secretary of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy. Thank you for this opportunity to be here. My distinguished colleagues, it's an honor to be on this panel with you. You've heard a lot of very detailed, good information on the area of reforms from both the Vice President and from the Minister. I will tell you that my role and the initiative that I partake in is how do we get from here to there, because they don't happen overnight, right? But you have to have a plan of how you're going to get there and utilize your energy to the best you can until you get to that point where the reforms are solid and they're in place and real changes are made. And that's what I want to talk about. But I have to start with a bit of a story and give you a little bit of context here. Right after the attacks in the United States on September 11th, 2001, our nation the United States went to a very focused effort on securing our infrastructure, physical protection of our infrastructure. We never wanted another attack to happen on our infrastructure. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent on securing our infrastructure. Note the word securing our infrastructure. Then something unique happened in 2005. It was called Katrina and Rita, and it was devastating. It rendered 100% of our offshore drilling capacity stopped. It shut down 80% of our refining capacity in the Southeast. It knocked out electric power to 23 million people. Right? Not one penny of that money spent on securing our infrastructure did any good to stop a hurricane from happening. So we really revisited that focus on securing our infrastructure, and we looked at a concept of resiliency, and it works really well in the energy sector. Resiliency basically meaning having the energy you need when you need it, regardless of the situation that you come across. Now that was demonstrated 3 years after that in 2008 because we had hurricanes Gustav and Ike. And where Katrina and Rita took us 4 months to recover, Ike and Gustav took us 1 month. So in just 3 years, shifting from physical protection to a concept of energy resilience, was able to restore and get back to where we were in just a fraction of the time without implementing that plan. You cannot stop bad things from happening to you. You have bad things happening to you right now in the East, which is causing a lot of problems on your energy system. There could be other similar bad things that can happen. There could be natural disasters that occur. You don't know. But the important thing is you've got to have an energy system that's responsive and that's resilient, and you can't do that without planning. So what do you need? You need leadership. You need strong leadership to make it happen. You need a structure to make it happen. You need an executable plan to make it happen. And most importantly, you have to implement the plan. You just can't write the plan without having the wherewithal to execute and implement that plan. So last fall, I had the honor and the privilege to lead an international delegation here to Ukraine, made up of the United States and Canada, working with the government of Ukraine to assist them in writing a Ukrainian National Energy Contingency Plan. And I will tell you that when we first started, I was very skeptical of being able to pull this together. It would never have happened. It happened under the leadership at that time of Deputy Prime Minister Huysman. We actually worked out of the Minister of Energy's office space. Deputy Minister Didenko offered up the space and provided a lot of logistic support for us to do that. And in 10 days, Ukrainians, not Canadians or US personnel, but Ukrainians wrote a 160-page contingency plan. And that was with the assistance of 15 different ministries. And these are people at the working level working together across 15 different ministries to write a 160-page contingency plan with 40-plus critical tasks that needed to be accomplished. It was a tremendous effort, probably one of the highlights of my 30-year career. And this was Ukrainians that did this. Now, unfortunately, the plan was never fully implemented. Shortly after that, we had an election, right? And a lot of the people who would have been responsible for carrying out some of these things, it didn't happen, right? But the government recognized the importance of having such a plan. And they recognized the importance of having to revisit this and say, you know what, we not only need a plan, but we need a structure of how we would structure ourselves to work in this area. So they've asked myself, Department of Energy, Canada, and in this case also the EU, to come back and revisit this planning effort. Now, I will tell you that it is not my intent to focus strictly on contingency planning. The word contingency denotes a plan that you put on the shelf, you pull it off and dust it off when you need it, but that's not the case. I am proposing this time around that we do an energy resilience plan for the country of Ukraine, because that is something that you do on a steady state basis. It is something that you revisit ongoing, right? You don't just pull it off the shelf, all right, but it's actually hardening and strengthening your energy systems. It can be in the form of a fuel diversification, both nuclear and other. It can be in the form of redundancy in the energy system. It could be security, certainly. It can also be elements of energy efficiency. It can help your system be much more resilient to different things that could happen to it. So this is what we're proposing to move forward with in the next round. At this very moment, I already have commitments from Canada and the EU. They provided personnel to be part of this team. We certainly have folks from the United States, and it is our hope and intent to be out here late in May to start this contingency planning effort, or I should say resiliency planning effort. And it's going to be much more deliberative. We're not going to do it in 10 days. We're actually going to spend 3 to 4 weeks in the country of Ukraine working with the experts, so we're not rushed to go through this. We're going to hopefully include the oblasts. They were not part of the first plan. We need to truly make it a national energy resilience plan. It's going to be completed, again, hopefully by the end of June, by midsummer. It's later than we would hope, but we should have plenty of time at least to impact going into this coming winter with some of the recommendations we're going to make. And something that's going to be a bit different, I mentioned last time we identified 40-plus critical tasks that needed to be executed in order to get through the winter. Now, thank God the winter was mild and Ukraine made it through. But what we didn't do, we're going to do different this time, is we're actually going to identify the roadblocks to implementing those tasks. So if we identify a task, or because it's a Ukrainian plan, but if they identify a task that needs to take place, they're going to identify what is the roadblock. Is it funding? Is that the roadblock? Is it policy? Is it needed legislation? What's that roadblock? That will certainly help the donor community if they have the ability to offer assistance in meeting these objectives and these tasks to identify where they can plug in and where they can fit. And I think that's going to be a very important part of this next effort. Now, I will tell you that this effort will not succeed without a dedicated, committed, and engaged leadership. I have no doubt that Minister Demchyshin supports this wholeheartedly, because he's told me that, right? He supports this mission, but he can't do it alone, and the Ministry of Energy cannot do this alone. It requires everybody across the government, across multiple ministries. As I mentioned before, we had 15 ministries participating last time. You only get that kind of coordination at the Deputy Prime Minister level or even the Prime Minister level himself. So it's very important that we get a level of commitment at that level to lead this effort, to shepherd this along, and to help us coordinate, because this is a whole of government effort to develop such a national plan, and it needs leadership across all the ministries to do this, not just one ministry. So that's very important. Since I was told to be brief, in closing, I want to tell you another story. Some of you may know Gordie Howe, a Hall of Fame hockey player in the United States. He was once asked, "What makes you such a great hockey player?" And his answer was, "A good hockey player skates to the puck. A great hockey player skates to where the puck is going to be." I think and I believe that Ukraine knows where that puck is going to be. All right? And this is an opportunity for Ukraine to be great, and all those involved in the process to make them great. So the US, Canada, and the EU are prepared to assist Ukraine in ensuring a reliable, survivable, and resilient energy system going forward. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Bryan. Theory is sometimes a self-delusion, but reality is a moment of truth. And reality is in a battlefield of everyday commercial life, struggling for sufficient gas supply. Andrei Kovalyov is perhaps not that known or that talkative, but he is definitely a man who somehow saved the security of supply of Ukraine through establishing proper reverse flows, of course with some international support, but he did it. I think we will be all very interested to hear his view and his plans on future developments, how to adapt this huge company, gas incumbent, which is kind of in heart of all energy problems of Ukraine. Please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I am very much honored to be this panel. Also, I would like to start my speech with expression of gratitude to our international partners who really did a lot and helped us a lot to go through this uneasy winter. And now they are helping us in moving forward further by implementing reforms and trying to achieve new gas market, trying to become closer to Europe. Due to the lack of time, I will start from the middle of my presentation with the reform plan, which is based on the new gas market law that was recently adopted by the parliament and is now awaiting signature by the president of Ukraine. We hope it will be signed soon. And this is what I personally like to call the pleasant part of the reform. And if you look at the bottom, you will notice that what we are trying to achieve is we are trying to finalize unbundling. As you know, in October of this year, there should be full separation of low pressure transmission services and sales of gas to small consumers, such as, for example, households and others. And this is one of the important steps that should help change the market, and with some time, I will explain later why not immediately, bring true competition to all segments of consumers. Second very important change is independent regulation and clear limits for state intervention. By clear limits, we mean is that there should be intervention only when it's needed, and that new market, which is transparent, efficient, and competitive one, should be able to regulate itself. Firstly and mostly in terms of gas pricing. However, in those segments where monopoly is natural, such as, for example, gas transportation, high pressure and low pressure, yes, there will be regulation. And the third point is market liberalization combined with public services obligations provision. By the latter, we mean there will be still a need for the transition period for someone, and I guess you will easily understand who that someone probably would be, to supply gas at under market prices to vulnerable consumers until prices reach full market level. The concept of public service obligations company has been already developed in its first draft, and we hope it will be brought to review by the Cabinet of Ministers very soon and will be transformed in all necessary bylaws that will govern how these public service obligations will be fulfilled and by whom. If you look at the existing state of Ukrainian gas market, and if you read many comments from people who are commenting why Naftogaz is needed, why Naftogaz is not removed from the market, this concept of public service obligations is exactly the answer. Had we had market price, if there was a clear competition, if the gas was sold at market level, there would be no need, at least in such a big scale, in such a big size, for a company to ensure that cross-subsidization is still in place. So when the prices reach the market level, we hope that Naftogaz will cease to exist in its current role as a company doing cross-subsidy. Next slide, please. This slide is just an illustration of the second part of reform, which is probably the unpleasant one and which is often avoided to be quoted by many people. This is the history of price increases done by different governments in Ukraine under different circumstances. The first promise was made by Prime Minister Tymoshenko in 2008 to bring market pricing to Ukraine in 3 years. The blue dotted line is the plan, the yellow line is actual reality. The second promise was made by Mr. Azarov in September 10. Now the increase time frame was decreased by half a year. The plan was even more ambitious, but the result was pretty much the same, 0. Now we have a new plan, and so far, though we see lots of negative comments about this, the plan, the first step has been fulfilled, and the first price increase was formalized in April, or meaning several weeks ago. Why it is so important and why we consider gas price as the key to any reform of natural gas market in Ukraine. Can you please switch to the next slide? We believe that only with increased gas price, only if all consumers in Ukraine pay fair market price, only if all producers in Ukraine get access to fair revenues from selling gas at market price, we can achieve the effect depicted at this slide. And the effect is very simple. What we are looking for is we are looking for independence from external suppliers of gas. There are two ways to achieve it. First, consume less. And price is the best incentive. Second, produce more. Again, price is the only source of funds which can be used by producers, especially state-owned ones. And if you know, Naftogaz is in ownership, Ukrsdobывание is the largest gas producer in Ukraine with huge potential, which is currently being wasted, which is, I'm not afraid of this expression, a stupid way to do. However, we're also currently considering with our external advisors how Naftogaz could help consumers go through this uneasy period, how we can help them decrease their bill. If the price is increasing, the only way to decrease the bill is to decrease the amount of gas consumed. Next slide, please. If you look at the next slide, was produced by a very reputable outside company, which is now helping us partly at their own expense. These are the 6 areas of investment prioritized by their relation of efficiency and investment required, what Ukraine could do and how much gas could be saved potentially. If you look at the bottom, there is 12 billion cubic meters gas consumption decrease. If you look at total consumption of Ukraine in household segment, if you compare it to countries like Poland, for example, it's still not that much. There is still room left, and my personal assessment of this table is that it's quite pessimistic. It's a base case scenario, and part of consumption can be driven by simple behavioral change in consuming gas. i.e. people should not heat their houses to 25 degrees Celsius as it's done in Kyiv often, and as it was done this April, this year, in a country which is in the state of war. We were consuming imported gas to heat our houses when the temperature was above 15 degrees Celsius. This is something where Naftogaz could also play a significant role by becoming a provider of assistance to households through making them direct clients, through helping them save gas, through helping them install meters, and that's what we will do as a part of PSO model. What is also important, there was a good question why we are spending so much on subsidies and we are spending such a small amount of funds on energy efficiency. The money which will be given by the state through the subsidy to those who need, who can't afford, is probably the most secure, most safe, and most transparent revenue which can be used by also private companies to help people save and which can be monetized to return investment. And this is something where we believe there's a huge potential in Ukraine at the moment for international companies, for international banks to fund energy efficiency in retail segment, for households, for multi-story buildings, for private apartments. Next slide, please. And as a pleasant side of energy efficiency and for the price increase, the potential of gas production increase in Ukraine is also huge. By 27, 29 BCM per year, that's something which could be, under the base case scenario, achieved by 2020, as it's mostly conventional gas. That is the perspective we see for Ukraine gas market. This is the perspective we see for Ukraine, and we hope that Naftogaz, until it ceases to exist, will be an important player in this process. Thank you.
Thanks to Mr. Kovalyev. Now it's we are a little bit over the envisaged time, but I think it would be fair to allow some discussion. Perhaps I will first give a word to the gentleman behind who wanted to ask Minister Demchyshin something already in advance. Yeah, please.
Yes. Thank you for speech. My name is Goto from Sumitomo Corporation, Japanese trading company. So I'd like to ask to the minister about the electricity. So we understand that now Ukraine imports electricity from Russia, but that is not good for Ukraine from the viewpoint of energy security. But on the other hand, so if we look at the solution, eliminating the cross-subsidy or privatization of the state company will also, of course, help it, but does not lead to the significant decrease of electricity, reduction of electricity import. What do you see as a way to reduce the electricity import from Russia?
You see, I will probably need to make a small explanation, and in my speech I indicated on that. The key problem is that some of the companies, including Centrenergo, for example, they don't have enough capital, working capital, to acquire coal and then use it for electricity production. So you see, we have multiple problems. We have technical, technological, logistical, and everything also supported by financial. If we wouldn't focus on money, you know, it wouldn't be a problem. You know, increasing tariff by 30–40%, it would be easy to eliminate any you know, problems with availability. But the point is that at this point of currently, state doesn't have internal capacity to subsidize, and industry is currently already more consuming more expensive electricity than in Europe, for example, and population unfortunately has been increased the tariff by 40% just very recently. So, you know, instrumentarium available to the regulator and to the ministry are very limited. In reality, what we are trying to do is savings, energy efficiency, and also one of the Japanese companies is currently also involved in modernization of Tripilya power plant located in 50 kilometers from Kiev. And this plant will be modernized, and I hope it will help to reduce consumption of coal, increase efficiency, and you know, also help to lower consumption of imported electricity. Just for your understanding, as of current, we are not importing electricity anymore. It was a case over a longer period of time in the heating season. This is true. Now, probably there are marginal inflows, but that's negligible, I would say. So we are preparing for the next heating season. We are trying to minimize gas consumption where we can, to switch to coal or to other sources. We see great potential for increasing capacity utilization at the nuclear power stations, which is there. You know, we are looking for other opportunities. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, please, Ms.
Hello, my name is Irina Paliashvili. Question to Minister Demchyshin. It's great that you're putting such a high emphasis on domestic production, but the only mechanism that you were suggesting in your presentation was subsoil licenses, selling them at auctions, which is not favored by investors. They want production sharing agreements. Can you please elaborate why this mechanism was missing from your presentation? Thank you.
Well, production sharing is just one instrument. This is development. You know, some people will buy licenses, some will save on initial investment, engage into profit sharing or product sharing or other agreements. I don't see a difference. This is just one, you know, there is a group of people who thinks there are specific instruments that can resolve all the problems. I can tell you it's not. You know, right to extract, to produce can be acquired on multiple levels, and I'm the fan of free trade and free economy. Thank you.
Okay, please, perhaps the first gentleman there, yes.
Yaroslav Petrov, Asters Law Firm. My question will be also related to production sharing agreements. And the question is to Mr. Demchyshin. And as you probably know, in the action plan of the government until 2020, the government decided that all joint activity agreements should be converted into production sharing agreements. And if we talk about strategy for development of the industry, it would be good to reflect this in the strategy. And it would be also interesting to know your view whether this initiative, which is emboldened in the action plan, will be performed, and whether these joint activity agreements will be converted. Thank you.
At this time, people who are engaged in joint activity agreements are paying 65% rent and rent payments, or proportion 65% of the revenue is paid to the state budget, which in my opinion is adequate, regardless of how they acquired the licenses. And the question how they acquired the licenses needs to be addressed to special agencies like General Prosecutor and SBU and etc. So if there is something wrong, they should definitely investigate those cases. But in my opinion, people paying 65%, well, they are already penalized. Again, referring to production sharing agreements, well, this is just an instrument. I think that talking about vision, we need to talk about privatization, about big pieces. And you, as a lawyer, you understand the instruments are available. And well, if product sharing agreement is a good way, it will be definitely used. No problem on that. Thank you.
Okay, the other gentleman, yes, please, and then Mr. Paul.
Thank you. Michael Dotsenko, U.S.-Ukraine Business Council. The question is, I guess, mostly to the European community. The title of this conference is Support for Ukraine Conference. So we understand why Ukraine needs support is because a neighbor of Ukraine has been waging a war, a hybrid war, which includes gas as a weapon. If European Union wants, let's say, to understand that the war is not just against Ukraine, but against the West in general, and Mr. Putin and his advisors stated it on numerous occasions on record, what if the European Union would, let's say, decrease the impact of this weapon by purchasing gas from Russia at Ukraine-Russia border, and then transport, and then having Ukraine transport gas, and that way the border of the European energy policy would be moved to the border between Ukraine and Russia. And another question is, how ready is Ukrainian government for implementing this? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that instability in the gas supply over the last few years, the problems with energy security, especially for Central and Eastern European countries, was one of the mobilizing elements towards that new dramatic changes through which the European Union is going right now, and the introduction of the energy union concept, and then the strategy which we adopted just a few weeks ago, and now we are working on its implementation. So it's quite clear that energy security is one of the issues which the energy union has to address. And of course, if I just would have to give a one-word answer, how I would like to achieve it, this is diversification. Diversification of supply, diversification of routes, and simply having more options where we would be getting our energy from. Being the biggest energy importer in the world, paying 400 billion euros a year for our energy imports, we just simply would like to be treated as a very important client who's paying the bills on time in hard currency, and who is always preferring a transparent, commercial, open and fair relationship. So this is, I would say, the basic prerequisite for all the discussions we are having right now. But in the last winter, I think we have shown that if we cooperate well with Ukrainian partners, and in this case, I think we found the common ground also to discuss this issue with Russia, and this trilateral agreement on gas supplies for this winter, I think, was a crucial one. And after quite a few very difficult winter seasons, we had one which was without real gas dramas. And therefore, we are working now very closely with Minister Demchyshin and Mr. Kobolev on extending the positive experience from the past from the past winter and to extend it to the future. Of course, the question you address, I think it's a very, very pertinent one. Of course, it's not only if the EU as a I would say, as a European entity is ready to consider it. Of course, if it comes to gas trading, this trade and business is done by the companies. And I think I see it as a very positive demonstration, positive sign that European companies are looking more and more closely to the possibility to work with Ukrainian partners on how to use the Ukrainian gas storage. But it's clearly a sign of confidence in the reforms which have been undertaken. I think next step of the implementation of the gas law, of the restructuring and modernization of Naftogaz, of gas systems would be additional signals that there is good investors' climate, that the investment would be welcome here. And then, of course, we will see how all this would influence our relationship between Russia and EU in the gas supplies, and also between Russia and the Ukraine. I think that we just need to work on this together, increase the trust of European investors, European gas companies into the cooperation with the Ukraine. I think it's happening, and then, of course, different kinds of models we can discuss and develop in the future.
Okay, thanks. Last question, Mr. Pauliuk, and then I will cut the discussion further because we are late. Thanks.
I would like to thank Mr. Šefčovič for mentioning Covenant of Mayors as one of the drivers for energy saving, and just wanted to correct, we have 102 municipalities right now, which is actually a quarter of municipalities at this moment, which are dealing with energy saving and reducing the need. At the same time, I wanted to ask Minister of Energy, Mr. Demchyshin, we have two problems at this stage. Municipalities do not have structures, they don't have energy managers, there is nobody actually to do the job in most of the municipalities. Whether you are planning, there was a plan of introducing of energy managers as a mandatory position in all the municipalities. Whether that's still on case because you are assigned.
What was the what was the goal for introducing representatives from ministries into the? No. I mean, there are such representatives, but
municipal energy managers who understand what's going on in municipality and can actually plan anything on the ground. As municipality is the most of consumers. It's 75% of consumption of energy in Ukraine, and there is nobody actually to deal with that. There was a discussion in Cabinet of Ministers of introducing that, and it stopped. Is it still discussed or not? And the second issue is the access of municipalities to small money, up to 1 million, 1.5 million euro for energy modernization projects, for energy reduction of consumption projects is very important, because EBRD is providing loans of 5 to 25 and higher. It is the share, it is the money which small municipality on region level or most of oblast level, they cannot bite it. So if I may also ask European Union representatives to kind of create the possibility for municipality of access to smaller money for energy saving, not just generation, because most of the money which is going from European Union, from EBRD and EIB, it goes into generation and replacement of generation facilities rather than insulation of the houses and rather than reduction of the need in the energy. Thank you.
Well, but I think that the question is not on who is providing money, but how it is channeled to the end consumer. Right?
And the interest rate is also important.
Well, interest rate in case of loans that are currently, being provided, it is subsidized. So, well, the magnitude of subsidy depends on the capability. As soon as the capability improves, subsidy will also increase. The question how to channel it to the end consumer, and I think currently what energy efficiency and Mr. Zubko are doing is right. They are trying to subsidize loans so that pretty much the end consumer's population is taking care of isolation of heaters, boilers, and etc. the problem of state program in reconstruction of housing is very difficult because it will mean that well, state would I mean the ownership structure or lender recipient structure is complicated in this issue. So you see, with district heat or generation, everything is simple. You provide loans and then question is resolved. Yes, there may be a problem with recovery and etc. It will come and it can be handled. Cost can be subsidized, but it is clear on who is providing, who is receiving. With housing, with population, it is more difficult. Therefore, going from the other side,
but
I think that's the right strategy.
But Mr. Savchuk from State Agency for Energy Efficiency will be more detailed about this later in his presentation. So now I would first thank to all the panelists for their excellent presentation and ask them to stay there where they are. This is, as I was told, it's a scenario, and next speakers are asked to perhaps come there to have their presentation because there was not enough space to fit all of you up there. And the first one is Mr. Martin Lidegaard, if I'm correct. Yeah, good. Minister for Foreign Affairs from Denmark, who will present this energy efficiency deal and other things related to Ukraine that are being executed by Denmark. Please.
Thank you very much. I will be brief. Take it easy. There's not much energy left in the room. So let me just thank the Ukrainian government for hosting this event and for the EU Commission for co-organizing it. And I will skip my speech as we are late and make it basic here to one story and 2 points. I would do like my American colleague. Actually, this should have been the energy minister of Denmark standing here, but his back is ill. So it's the foreign minister instead. And since I'm the former energy minister, I know what I'm talking about. I was energy minister in Denmark for 3 years. And we passed through the same kind of emergency story like you did, only that we began back in 1970. You should imagine in 1970, the whole of Denmark was running on oil. Our cars, our power plants, our heating systems, everything was oil. But then came the oil crisis in 1973. The oil prices were doubled, even doubled, and the whole country of Denmark almost collapsed. We were desperate. We found it necessary to forbid to drive on Sundays. We closed every second road of light simply due to the prices of energy. And we decided to make a complete energy transformation of Denmark. And basically we did 3 things. 1, energy efficiency. Since 1980, the Danish economy has increased dramatically with a very high economic growth, but our total energy consumption has decreased. It's possible to do it, to create more jobs, more wealth, stronger and more competitive society, consuming less energy. The second thing we did was that we diversified our energy consumption. First, we found our own gas and oil, but in the 90s we found out that also due to environmental and climate concerns, we should shift to renewables. So we invested heavily, especially in wind turbines. Now, isn't that terribly expensive? That depends on how you do it. Today you will find that close to 40% of our total power mix emerges from wind, around 60% from renewables in total, and you will still find that the market prices of power in Denmark are far below average in Europe, including subsidies for investments in renewables. So it's doable, and it's actually also good business. And the third thing we did, and that's the reason why it has been rather cheap to do it, is the market. To liberalize the market, to ensure that you can sell whatever you produce and you can import whatever you need to back up your renewables That's how you do it cheaply. So these are the three things: energy efficiency, diversification, and market reforms. And I can highly recommend it. And I'm so happy that today, Minister, we will open a Danish-Ukrainian Energy Center together. But the 2 points I would like to make, the 2 conclusions I will take out of the Danish experience is, 1, coordination. Coordination among your ministries is absolutely necessary, but also coordination about us. Because I think it sounds fantastic with the plans you're going to merge, but of course this is closely connected to the activities of the Energy Efficiency Center, of all what you're doing, respectively, in different tracks. And if you don't have that donor and ministerial coordination, it's very hard to make the difference and to get to implementation, which is exactly the key when it is here. And then the second point, which is just very basic, is to get things done when it comes to the market. And that's probably the most important thing. That takes interconnectivity, it takes liberalization and regulation. And many things, if you're going to make privatization or liberalization, you should regulate less. No. If you want a real market, you should regulate more. So you ensure the right framework for that privatization, free competition, and no monopolies. Good luck, and thank you for me to being here. I have to run away, so I will do that, but we'll see you later. Thank you.
Thanks, Minister. Our next speaker is Andreas von Beckerath, Ambassador of Sweden in Ukraine, who is kindly invited. Please.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me as a speaker. I will follow the example of the Danish Foreign Minister and try to be as very brief as I can. And I will also focus my remarks exclusively on energy efficiency. I think from a Swedish perspective, Swedish experience, we do believe that energy efficiency should be the #1 priority within the energy sector. It makes economic sense, it makes environmental sense, and it makes sense from a national security point of view. Someone showed a slide earlier today on the diversification, the importance of diversification. I do agree with that. And it was mentioned that Ukraine needs to invest in coal, nuclear power, and gas. To my mind, the top priority also when it comes to diversification should be energy efficiency. I know it's a cliche, but it's important to remind ourselves that the cheapest and most environmental friendly gas is the gas that we never consume. And I think it's important to bear that in mind. And for this reason, Sweden has been very much focused its reform support on helping reforms in the energy efficiency sector. We have been in Ukraine supporting reforms since 1995. And since then, we have been supporting Ukraine with approximately 210 million euros. And more than half of this has been in the field of sustainable infrastructure linked to environment and especially within energy efficiency. Over the next 7 years, we will invest another 175 million euros supporting Ukrainian reforms, not least in the field of energy efficiency. Two of the most important funds that we're supporting, I won't dwell too much about that because I know there are 2 other speakers that will speak more, but it's the E5P, where Sweden has invested 27 million euros, and the NEFCO fund, where Sweden has contributed with 9 million. I think given the fact that Ukraine consumes 3 times more energy, gas, than the EU average when it comes to GDP unit. And given the fact that we do have quite generous funds, E5P not least, NEFCO, I do think that the potential to actually make progress when it comes to energy efficiency is huge. I think what's important when we look at energy efficiency, when I'm traveling around the country talking to people about energy efficiency, I very often get the sense, talking to municipalities, that they believe that investing in energy efficiency is important, but it's long-term. You get the money back in 25 years. I think it's important to understand that the payback time on energy efficiency investments is much, much shorter than you imagine. I talked to two people that know much more about this than I do, and I asked them about the average payback time on energy efficiency investments. And they said 5 to 7 years, sometimes even shorter, sometimes 3 years. I also think it's important when you look at investments in energy efficiency to look at the monetary savings. I realize that it's a challenge now with the depreciation of the hryvnia, with interest rates, high interest rates. But I still think if you look at the monetary savings you can achieve with energy efficiency investments, it does make economic sense. Very quickly, 3 points how I believe that we could sort of unlock the huge potential when it comes to energy efficiency. First, I think it's important to remove the barriers to investments in energy efficiency and replace them with incentives. There needs to be incentives for municipalities. When municipalities are saving energy, they must be able to use these savings to pay back loans or to make new investments into energy efficiency. And in this regard, I also think it's very important that the government supports the easy and swift permission to obtain external borrowing. Secondly, as the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs mentioned, coordination among the key ministries in the Ukrainian government, but also coordination on the donor side, I think is incredibly important. Thirdly, I think it's important also that the government actually facilitates the implementation of the investments into energy efficiency. Over the years, we and our partners within the IFIs have experienced many instances where investments were cumbersome, took time, and sometimes were impossible due to the fact that EU standards was used. So I think it's incredibly important that the government strives to make it easier to simplify the procedures and to bring practices in line with EU standards and EU norms. And in this sense, I also think it's important to look at the VAT exemption. VAT exemption for the contractors working with IFIs, not only the contractors themselves, but also the subcontractors. And just to conclude my remarks, I would like to praise the government as well. It has been done already today during the conference. But the decision, to my mind, the single most important reform decision that has been taken in this country throughout the last year was actually the decision to phase out gas subsidies. I realize how painful it is for the Ukrainian households when the tariffs increased by 3 times. And it is important that the most vulnerable are compensated through social benefits. But I do think that everyone understands, or not everyone that has been in power in Ukraine have understood that this is the right thing to do. And every single government and president so far has shied away from actually raising the gas tariffs. It makes sense because 8% of the budget has been gas tariffs, and this money can be spent much more wisely in other areas. It makes sense because the gas subsidies have been the primary source of high-level corruption. It makes sense because Sweden and other countries and investors trying to improve the energy efficiency, it can only be implemented if there is an economic incentive. And it makes sense from a national security perspective when it comes to Ukraine's energy independence. I do think that the biggest challenge now for the government is to explain why these tariffs had to be raised, why this was important, and why this, in the long run, would lead to a more prosperous Ukraine. And I do think that those that tried to argue in a slightly populistic way that there has been alternatives to raising the gas tariffs, I do think that is harmful for the country. Of course, it's also important for the government to look at ways how to support the households so that the households can actually influence their own gas bill. And Sweden, together with our partners, are very, very much looking into the possibility of how we can support these efforts. Just very quickly to conclude on a slightly more positive note, I am hopeful that we will see progress in the years to come. We have a government, we have decision makers that have the political will. We heard that today. We have a donor community that is very eager to support Ukraine. Now we just need to move from good intention to actual progress and actual results. Thank you.
Thanks for your enthusiastic words, Mr. Ambassador. I think everybody could really learn a lot from Sweden, from your experiences in energy efficiency. Once I was minister several years ago, and I went to study Sweden, and we introduced really energy efficient measures. So I was always grateful to Swedish technical assistance, and I hope and I'm sure that Ukraine will do the same way, since especially let's say energy efficient, more developed EU member states are very active in Ukraine. Our next speaker will be Sheuki, am I correct? Sheuki Adzuner, Director of EBRD in Ukraine. I think I don't need to introduce him more detailed.
Thank you. Well, I'm, given the task of talking about money most of the time, so I will do that. I think the money will be available, but it will depend, and I'll get to what it will depend on a little bit later. But I want to tell first what we have done and what we are doing in Ukraine in the energy sector to support the government's initiative, because we know that a lot of the problems that the Ukraine is facing today, financially, economically, is really relating a lot to the abuse of the energy sector in the past. And the flip side of that coin is that with the right policies and the right investment climate, the ability then of the country to pull itself out of this economic misery is going to be a hell of a lot easier. That we believe that Ukraine should have energy independence in the near term as an objective, and hopefully in the medium term energy self-sufficiency through the measures of energy efficiency and other steps that you have mentioned. What we have done until now is approximately providing 1.6 billion euro of financing for projects worth about almost 5 billion euro in 33 projects in both energy and natural resources sector. I mean, just to give a quick example, that earlier last year in December we signed a 150 million euro to support the transport GTS Ukrogas Trans ability to improve the infrastructure and enable the reverse gas flow. We have earlier this year signed a $65 million Zahidna station for substation to support the electricity supply to the region. In the renewable sector, with a view to support, of course, energy diversity, energy security, we financed over a dozen projects. These are small projects. And then in the power and energy utilities sector, in the big scale, we've done a number of high voltage transmission projects, such as the Rivne, Kiev, Zaporizhia, Kakhovka, each in the 150, 170 million range. And of course, we provided 300 million for Energoatom to use to enhance the safety at the nuclear stations. And we are still implementing a $200 million program for hydro rehabs. I think enough has been said about energy efficiency, and we put it in a more broader sense of energy sustainability. But the projects that we have done in the past that has an energy efficiency or saving component between 2006 and now is close to 2 billion euros in over 100 projects. these are sort of our achievements, but we're not dumb money. You know, when we provide financing, we also supply a lot of technical assistance and technical cooperation, and we provide policy dialogue in order to build the capacity and in order to ensure that a proper, transparent implementation of our projects according to the Western standards are taking place. We also mobilize funds from the likes of Clean Technology Fund or EFIP. My friend and colleague will speak very shortly about that. Now we've done all these things, but we also have a very strong pipeline now. We're looking to provide additional support to NAC for the purchases of gas at favorable prices. We are looking to or prepared to support upstream production when the investment conditions, therefore, are right. In the power and energy utilities sector, we're looking at further high voltage transmission support, and we're looking to provide this year and next year for Kani Pump Station and Kahauka hydro generation projects. In energy efficiency, I will leave it to you to talk about, and I'll skip that. But we are, looking to do these things and taking the upfront risk because we have confidence in this government's commitment to the reform process, that they will pursue and implement the necessary measures, but also they will commit to not to reverse them in the future. I think that is equally important going forward. Now, while we supply all this money, and we're not alone, IFC is there, the World Bank is there, our money is not enough to respond to all the needs of Ukraine. And we need and we want private sector engagement. And after all, that's also my bank's mission, to encourage private sector engagement. But what we need for that is, of course, the trust, the issue of trust to be built in the eyes, in the minds of the international investors and banks, commercial banks. And that takes time, that takes actions and deeds, as I said. But I hope and I'm confident that this government will build that trust in a relatively reasonable period of time. What I would like to tell you is that what the Ukrainian government has so far achieved is very praiseworthy, and particularly in the context of the geopolitical challenges and the economic difficulties it is facing. But even more impressive is their openness to seek and implement advice, and that I really find very admirable. We are particularly impressed, and please don't let this go to your head, but with the NAC administration's basically receptiveness to accept and implement the measures that we have recommended for corporate governance, transparency, as part of the loan conditionalities. We are particularly impressed with that, as I said. We are similarly impressed with the elimination of rent-making intermediaries that removes all this, suckers, if you like, bloodsuckers out of the system, and also with the courage of this government to implement a very, very tough, politically tough tariff increases. We're pleased about the decision to unbundle the NAC transmission and distribution services. And we are looking forward to the development of a network code for an implementation thereof, of course, for third-party transparent access to UTG in a competitive manner. In the PEU side, we are really pleased to see the reversal of the previous unfavorable decision about the green tariffs and for existing projects, that is. And I think, your readiness to compensate for the past delays in tariff adjustment is praiseworthy. It is a virtue to realize that the mistakes may have been committed, as we are doing, but it is really a virtue to correct them and take the remedial actions, therefore. We're looking forward to the adoption of the energy market reforms, which will allow competitive and bilateral contracting. I think that is essential to an effective market and opening of the markets to private sector players to reduce the present monopolistic structures. We also welcome, Mr. Minister, your efforts to build up the level of competence in the energy regulator to the European standards. But let me tell you what we are most looking forward to. We are looking very much forward to this government's continued resolve to full-fledged application, enforcement of the rule of law across the entire Ukrainian economic and social life. We are also looking forward to the cessation of the conflict in the east and attempts to interfere with Ukraine's sovereignty. And finally, we are looking forward to a concrete demonstration of a sense of shared responsibility on the part of the international community to complement the sacrifices that the Ukrainians are making to pull their country out of this present economic and financial difficulties. So when all these things happen, I think the money will come in plenty. So thank you for your time and attention.
Thanks for this fortune telling or future telling. The focal point of many discussions today was a person who will have a presentation now, Mr. Savchuk, Director of State Agency for Energy Efficiency, who is in charge of all the activities related to energy efficiency and forthcoming reforms. Please.
Thank you very much. Presentation. Thank you. Dear colleagues, the energy independence is a matter of national security today. Therefore, the efficient use of energy resources is a top priority for our country. Now, we do our best in this direction. The greatest potential for energy saving in Ukraine exists in the housing and utilities sector. Next slide, please. Therefore, today, great attention is paid to the thermal modernization of houses. Ukraine needs 35 billion euro for thermal modernization of housing sector. Next slide, please. We have already taken important steps to reduce natural gas consumption in housing. In particular, the state compensates the part of the principal of loans as follows: 20% for natural gas boilers replacement, 30% for energy efficiency materials at individual households, and 40% for energy efficiency materials for condominiums. The program of loan compensation for non-gas boilers have showed great positive dynamics. Since October last year, till now, Oschad Bank has issued over 45 million hryvnia for loans on alternative fuel boilers. In April this year, the state support program has been extended to the thermal modernization of private and multi-apartment buildings. 2 more banks were added to this program. Next slide, please. The next important step is the thermal modernization of public building. Next slide, please. The required investment in the energy efficiency of public sector is 4.4 billion euro. It will save up to 200 million cubic meters of natural gas per year by 2020. Full implementation of the program will help save up to 700 million cubic meters of natural gas each year and other resources. Next slide, please. To achieve this goal, this month, the Parliament has approved 2 laws on energy service mechanism, ESCO. The mechanism allows private businesses to invest in energy efficiency activities in public buildings. Attention, the investments will be returned from the achieved energy savings. This will create the market of energy services and thousands of new jobs. Next slide, please. To provide a sustainable financial of mentioned sectors, the agency proposes to establish the Ukrainian Energy Efficiency Fund, which will operate together with the Donors Fund. Next slide, please. The creation of the Ukrainian Energy Efficiency Fund is prescribed in the coalition agreement. The agency, with the German Ministry of Environment and the Berlin Economics Company, has worked out the model of the fund. The appropriate draft decree of the government has already been prepared. Next slide, please. The overall concept is given at this slide. The donors fund is expected to be led by the EBRD. Negotiations are currently ongoing. The Ukrainian fund will work according to the revolving mechanism, which is in the slide. The revolving mechanism foresees that the part of savings of state budget subsidies will be spent on energy efficiency projects. International financial organization representatives will be involved in administration and control of the fund to ensure its transparency. Next slide, please. The mentioned steps will result in the reduction of natural gas consumption by 13 billion cubic meters per year by 2030. Next slide, please. Ladies and gentlemen, in fact, we speak about the creation of 40 billion euro market of energy efficiency. And so I invite you to take part in creation of Donors Energy Efficiency Fund, which will work in Ukraine. It will give the opportunity to apply the newest energy efficiency technologies, and your investments will find the reliable and effective return in the huge and transparent market. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Savchuk, and also for all your enthusiasm. We as Energy Community Secretariat are closely cooperating and observing it, and I really have to say that we are happy to see such an enthusiastic team. And now we are slowly coming till the envisaged end of the presentations, but I still have 4 speakers. Is there any volunteer who would not show up? If not, then I have to really ask you to stick to 3-4 minutes. Next one is Magnus Risted, Managing Director of NEFCO, one of these 2 financial schemes that are coming close to the people.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I will try and be very brief. NEFCO is the Nordic Environment Finance Corporation. We are sort of established by the Nordic governments, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland. And very short of what we are doing, we of course are trying to disseminate and the Nordic experience with regard to energy efficiency, cost savings, and transparency. So far in Ukraine, we have 100 projects. Roughly a majority of those are in the public sector, rest on the private sector. Out of these projects, 30 projects have been implemented. And the target that we do have is small and medium-sized projects. So our investment is usually between 500,000 euros up to 5 million euros. And we, of course, don't do these projects alone. We do cooperate with EBRD, EIB, and so forth in order to scale up, but also as in partner in projects. In the public sector, our projects are targeting buildings as well as district heating companies. And we do get grant funds from the E5P, which you will hear a little bit more on, but we also have funds directly from the Nordic governments, as you also have heard prior. We also do cooperation with other countries. We do have GIZ, we do have USAID in supporting the development of the projects that we are doing. Something that you might have heard in the previous sessions was that we have gotten a new assignment called the Nordic Initiative, or Nordic Energy Efficiency Humanitarian Initiative, which is to fast-track projects. This assignment was given to us 6 months ago, from the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the Nordic governments. And we have already now 10 projects approved. 5 projects procurement has started. So we hope to be able to implement them during this summer, which is a difficult part. And that brings me to 4 sort of issues that we do have in order to speed things up. Of course, what you've heard a lot about is the reforms. And of course, the tariffs, the social reforms is essential, is very good, and it needs to continue. Energy savings companies, the budget code, we actually participate in a program together with the Minister of Finance to improve that in order to increase the creditworthiness of the municipalities, which is a tricky part. But there are other issues also, like construction norms. You know, it's still a little bit outdated, the systems. That means to introduce efficient technology into the municipalities, into the sector is very difficult. There are other needs also that needs to be reformed. But of course, all in all, this should lead to predictability and increased creditworthiness of the municipalities. And then, of course, the second item is, of course, coordination between the ministries, because many of these reforms are in different ministries, and they have to be harmonized. In addition to that, different ministries have to be involved in the process of the projects, which are delaying the implementation of the projects. Then some small points. Of course, as mentioned before,